Good morning. According to that clock, we got an hour. Y'all want to play cards or something? What? Oh, me. Right on time here. We appreciate you all being here this morning. We're going to have to get a bigger podium, I think. I ain't got enough room for my notes. And I write fairly small and real ugly, so yeah. We do appreciate all of you being here this morning. It's a wonderful time, and I know with that extra hour of sleep you didn't get last night, you feel much better this morning. So you all know your cycle is you only schedule to sleep so much anyway. Those of you sleep more than about 4 hours, something's wrong anyway. I figured I'd get a lot of something this morning, get you guys started. Come on, wake up now. I actually got, and this is kind of weird. I guess it ain't weird when you're a college student. I got when I was in college to sleeping 4 hours a night. That's all I ever did. And I worked that way for years. In fact, I got in that cycle, and it's just beginning to break a little bit. I can go to sleep and sleep a little bit more than 4 hours. I can take a nap during the day. I used to couldn't do that ever. I just, sleeping is, the nighttime is not a good time for me. I just soon be awake and going all the time. But you do tire out, I know that. And I'm getting tired easier now than I used to for sure. I don't know what's causing it, but see if I can get a doctor to figure out what might be causing that somewhere along the line. We do appreciate you all being here this morning, though. We want to have a little levity as we begin our class. We're going to pick back up with the qualifications for elders. We're talking about the family in that regard. We talked about the elder and himself last week, and the family and the husband with one wife primarily. We got a little bit into the children. We'll go on into that this morning. And I did go back and do am I going out on you or something? Okay. I did go back and do a little bit. I want to address what Casey's talking about when he said office this morning, because that is sort of in our summation. We'll go back into it, but I want to be sure we get it now since it's fresh on our mind again. Talk a little bit about that this morning as we start off. We know that we have quite a few that we need to remember in prayer, of course, and I'm just going to name names, not go through the details. In a lot of cases, if you don't, we can be sure to ask. But Joyce Ailes, Brandon Burns had surgery, and so did Pam Peller. Marley Lawrence is going to have some surgery. Jennifer O'Neill is continuing her treatments. We need to remember them. And Allison Netterville and her upcoming doctor's visit. We need to remember them. And, of course, the sympathy going to the Sister Marie Cosby family, Marie Cosby Hughes, and the Jesse Wiggins family. Also remember them. Anyone else that you'd like to add to the list this morning? I'm sure you do have. Melvin is going to lead us on our opening prayer in a minute. So. Ooh, it's warm in here today. I probably didn't dress right. Ma'am? Marlon is sick. I am too, but not that way. Anyone else? Okay, Mel. You making notes? Okay. Most of those I think are in the bulletin. If you. Amen. Thank you, Melvin. I want to go back and as we talk just a minute about the office, as Casey referred to it last week, a little more definition. I want to talk about that, but I'm going to give a little background first. When you study in the New Testament, you study words, you know, it's in the time that it was written, what it was about, and what was going on, how they did. And we tend to modernize things, and we tend to use a lot of things today based on computer technology and all this stuff that we've got. But I want to assure you, there are probably, I couldn't count them on all my toes and fingers if they were all there, that the people that have written leadership training classes and done all kind of things. But there is nothing, zero, not one of them, that supersedes or doesn't find what you'll find right here, period. Everything you want to find is right here in the Bible. It is written a long time ago. All of the principles still work. It always will work because it was written by the all-wise Father. And when I say written, I'm not talking about literally his hand, but I'm talking about that's where it came from. So when you need to remember, and we go especially in the workplace, and I've been there and been through eons of training as a government employee like you always get. And you see all these magical things, and you think about making money, and you're in a private business, and you do all these magic things, training and planning and doing all this. But when it comes back down to it, this principle, the principle of elder, doesn't fit that. That's not what it's about. It's not about making money. It's not about successful business. It's about servant. And we need to remember that. Because as the writer there, as Paul writing to Timothy in chapter 3, the verse 1, he says, it's true saying, if a man desire the office of a bishop. And you all know my favorite word for that definition, and that definition comes back, there are three of them. We talked about that way back, I won't go into it, but it's shepherd. So as you desire the office, it's not like a job or a position or a president of a company. That's not what it's about. It's all about service. And when you think about service, that's the lower end, is what most people think. When you're in a company, the servant end is not the president of the company. So it's not a job position. Now, in essence, it does have authority. It carries with it more of a maintenance, a protection. A presbyter is one of the words that we talk about. And we think about shepherd. I want to give you an illustration that I read and studied. I looked this back up when Casey prompted me so I could remember. I knew it was back there, but it just wouldn't come out like I wanted it to. So I did a little research this week. And if you think about it and go back in the time frame that this happened, shepherds and sheep, if you walked down the road and that's the way you went, you didn't drive your Cadillac down the road, you would find a lot of shepherds and a lot of flocks. And the way that they operated, and you'll notice and you've seen as we talk about it, that the sheep understood the voice of the master. And I read some history on, and this is outside, but this will show you how God and his wisdom shows us how we need to be leading. These shepherds would have their sheep, and they could be intermingled with another group of sheep from another shepherd. But by the voice of that shepherd, they would separate. Now, when they got to nighttime, and you know, when we see in the Bible, the wolves would come, want to eat the sheep and destroy them and take care of them. A lot of times they built a little temporary brush, or they got around a cave or something, and they got their sheep bundled up together at nighttime. But there was always a gate or an opening where they could get them in to whatever they did. Guess who slept in the gate? The shepherd. The shepherd was the gate. The shepherd protected the sheep to the point that he would sacrifice his life. Does that sound familiar? The good shepherd, you remember, what did he do? He gave his life for us. So now that's back to where it is, and when I think about an office, it's more of, and some of the words says oversight, responsibility. And notice this, if you go back to some of the original language and some of the words that tie to it, similar to a parent, which again fits very well with what we're talking about this morning. Because it's not as a job, it's not authoritarian as that I'm the big guy on the block and I've got control. It's the servant attitude. And that is what we think about when we look at this office, if you will. It is an appointed office, and that's all that means is delegated someone to take care of this responsibility, to take care of the sheep. And we've talked about qualifications and what they mean to make that happen. But that gives us just a little bit of background as we start talking this morning. I've had some verses here that I want to read. These verses again. They're in the Bible, and I'm going to give you the place they're located in just a moment. But when I look at children of an elder and his wife, they're mentioned a lot of places, and I won't have time to go back to all these verses. So I want to read these to you to start with. I want these to be sort of implanted in your mind as we discuss some of these qualifications along with the elder and his family qualifications that we have. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1 down through verse 4, it's got some really good things. You'll remember, I believe I said that. I think I've said it up here one time when I was doing the address of each month that we do, and then I've said it in here. There are a couple of things that, if we're not careful, we're training our children, and we are seeing it in essence. And when I say that, we are, because I have, is reverence. You don't see the reverence in children in a lot of cases. And I'm saying this in society. I'm not talking about in the church. Probably can see it there some too. But if you see the reverence and the commitment, those are two words that you see throughout the qualifications of an elder. They're two things that you're going to see when we read these verses about the children of an elder. So as we begin there in Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 6, where Paul writes, inspired of God again, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest live long on the earth. And, you notice he backs up and catches all of us here. And ye fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You could put that tag on an elder. That's the way it needs to be. As we are not to be. It's not the office of authoritarian office. It's not the authority about it. It is about leading. It's about preparing, about serving, making sure the sheep are fed properly, are protected properly. That's kind of where that office comes from again. Now, another set of verses, and they're not fitting just as we start off, but I want them in your mind again so we can, as we go through these qualifications. 1 Peter 5 and verse 1 through verse 5. Where Peter writes, the elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking oversight, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind, neither as being lords over God's heritage, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd shall appear, ye shall receive a crown of glory that fadeth not away. Now note this verse. Likewise ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. And in this case, it's not necessarily talking about an elder of the church. When I did that this morning on my little thing on my computer, I had it count how many times the word elder was used in the Bible. How many times do you think it was? I didn't write it down, so I really don't know, but I've got a comment about it. Used real often or not very much? 1,000 times, 200, what do you think? It actually surprised me it was not that much. It was more than that, but it was not as large a number as I was looking. But now it was used a lot in the Old Testament, but it was used in the New Testament. And elder fits this when you look at it. Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with the humility, for God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble. All generations that we have, whether we know it or not, whether we try to make it happen or not, since God created man in the Garden of Eden, have always had a form where the older people taught the younger people, period. Now you'll say, well, I didn't do that. We call it a lot of times mentoring sometimes, but you teach and mentor when you don't even think you are. How many times have you been, and I can remember when I was in grade school and you had a teacher that didn't even know they were influencing you. Or maybe your neighbor said or did something to you that you remembered for a lifetime. So we want to say, well, we formally do these things, and we do need to do those things. But as an elder or as a family, we work together for service to God. We have roles that each of us play. Now that I've got my verses right away read, I want us to think about some of the things that we looked at. I think we started talking about children who are the elders to have children who are not wild and disobedient. Again, that sounds really rough, but there are some translations that use it that way. When I looked at that and looked at some of the root words there, children that are not in insubordination. Most of you, or at some time or other, were a child. Did you always do everything that your mom and dad told you to do? I didn't. I don't know about you guys. Y'all probably a lot better than I was. I tended to sometimes, maybe more times than I ought to, do things that I wasn't supposed to. But now if you look at this is not what we're talking about here. Every one of us do this. But if we make a habit of every time, or a habit of our lifestyle, whether we're young or old, of insubordination or excess riot, we say here. When we use the word riot today, we think, we're everybody's throwing stones and burning barrels or something. No, I don't know. That's not what it's talking about here. When we're talking about the riotous type living, at this time, you're talking about folks that were just insubordinating all the time. They didn't want to do anything anybody told them to do, whether they were children, whether they were men, whether they were women. And we have that way. Sometimes we have children in our lives that go through phases that they are that way. Some of the times it's ages that they do that. It varies from one to the other, as all of you know. Varies with who they're being influenced by. Again, you remember when we talk about examples, when we talked about a while ago was mentoring. They are going to be mentored. They're going to be trained. They're going to be shown this leadership somewhere, sometime. And as an elder in his family, he needs to be sure that he's the one showing it, and the standard he is following is this right here. This morning, Bubba and I were discussing it, and we talk all the time, guys. Y'all, we were in the lobby talking about some things that happened and occurred during the week, and that we would pray about and do. And he was saying some things that I said this morning, and he said, I was thinking yesterday about just calling you about that. And I think Pee Wee was there, and I said, well, we were thinking the exact same thing, but I said, if we use the exact same standard, we should be thinking the same thing. Because it's not our opinion, remember. It's what the Bible says. So as we talk about these children, or riotous, or wild, or whatever, and of course that NIV uses that word a little bit more. I read some of these verses earlier that we talked about, and you'll see this where they're out of control, being disorderly. You'll see in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 18. I didn't read that verse. That's the verse you can write down. The actual word is associated in that case with drunkenness. If an elder has a child that's got a problem with something like that, then he's not, I'll say an elder candidate that we're trying to look at, he's not qualified. His family can disqualify him as much as himself. So that's the reason it's important that we evaluate that, because again, the standard and the model of the family that God put in place very much mirrors the standard of an elder and leading and being in that office, or being in that servanthood, or being that shepherd of a congregation, because they are the family. You feel and hurt and cry and happy and all the things that you do, all the emotions that you go through, you do as an elder, just like you do your own family. And when you talked about the word that I said earlier about commitment, this one's hard. it comes hard sometimes when you have things going on at home that you might need to be there, but then something at the church or in the flock happens that you need to be there. There's no decision to make. This book has made that decision for you if you're going to serve as an elder. That sounds hard, but actually it's great. That's one of the best things that's ever happened to me, is to be able to be around like fellow Christians. And I'm not saying like perfect, not like blameless. We'll get to that in a minute with blameless again with the qualification of the elder. But you see the children here. He must, another one that I wrote, and again, you remember I sort of put these together in this family, and must manage his family well. And the words, if you look at it, is in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 4 there, and the qualifications of it. When you look at that, and you'll see in verse 4 where it says, one that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. The leadership that he provides. And again, if you look at all the things with it, this is not somebody out there with a big whip keeping his family in line. The family sees what's important to him. Believe me, when you're an elder, your children will see if you make that decision and you go do that service to that flock when maybe you need to be with them for something that they want. At first, they won't understand it when they're younger. As they get older, they will. Because it's again, the priorities that you have to make, the priorities that God expects from you. The shepherd, you remember, is willing to lay down his life. The good shepherd laid down his life. He's already done that for us. Think about that as we think about these qualifications. Manage his family well. Because if he can't manage his family well, that shows you a little bit about his leadership. The qualities, the qualifications he has as a leader. So that's the reason God's got this. I've thought it so, the more I study this, and believe me, I have studied a number of times in my life, and I'll study a number more, whether I'm an elder or not, until the Lord allows me to move on from this life. I find more and more about how the family, the way it's designed by God in the Bible, is so close to the church and the eldership in the way that's designed. There's so much love. It's just get a lump in my throat when I start thinking about the love that we have. I mean, I can just sit here and see this group of people here, and I don't think there's not a one here that if I had an emergency and called you, if you were anywhere where you could be there, you wouldn't be there for me. And I hope and pray. I don't hope, I pray. I'm not about hoping. I'm praying that you feel that way about me. If I could get to it and do it, I will, as long as it's in line with what God wants us to do. Now, when we get that tight, that's just like our family. How many times in the middle of the night have you had a call as a parent? Dad, I'm maybe, can you come get me? I've had those a few times. It might have been a broke down car. It might have been a place it shouldn't have been. But again, how many of us have said the same thing to our Savior? Jesus, I'm praying. I need you. Need you to come get me. And he comes every single time. He'll get us. He'll help us. He'll take care of us if we're willing to do what? And we need to remember that with our children. As we manage our life and manage our families, that if they continue to call us in the middle of the night and come get us, I can remember my dad told me one time that I don't think I ever was in jail. I can't remember it if it was. But I can remember him telling me, if you get caught doing whatever it was, and it could be anything, you call me at night, I'm going to do things a couple of times for you. But the third time, you're on your own. I'm not coming. You're going to spend the night in jail. Of course, I didn't ever do that. Thank goodness, Lord will. Lord helped me out on that and kept me out of a lot of trouble. But the Lord would come anyway, the third time, the fifth time, if we're willing to change, if we continue along that line, and that's what we're talking about here with an elder and his family. If we see that pattern that there's no change in those families, they're going to make mistakes. We don't need to think they're not going to have a family that doesn't have mistakes with their children. But if they continually make the same mistake, then maybe that's not the time for that person to serve as an elder. Maybe he needs to work on his family a little bit more. That's for him, not because we want him as elder, but for that person and that family. Because it does take time and effort, as all of you know, that they've been parents. So maintain it. Ma'am? I think that was one of the verses I had listed there a while ago. But you're right. If he can't do that, he can't do the other. Now, again, we don't need to be, and I want y'all to think that we're so critical about this, because an elder can be serving as an elder and have a family that starts messing up. That can happen because we're not perfect, again, you remember. But if he makes the amends and he repents and that family straightens up, what happens? He can continue to serve as an elder. Because again, he's following the pattern. If we say, oh, his child, something happened here, and won't even say what it was, so he no longer qualifies for an elder, and that child repents and that elder repents, so he's still not able to be an elder, what about us? We're going to go to heaven. How many times are we going to be forgiven? Just one time and forget it? I'm so thankful that's not the case, because, wouldn't be many of us up there if we only got one chance. That don't mean we need to stretch and see how many chances we can use, but we get 490 to start with, if we think about that. So we got to be patient. We got to be caring and loving about those candidates and those that are serving as elders. And when I say that in that verse you talked about, rule well his family, and that's not the iron rule. We want you to think that. If our children see us as people that love them so much, and sometimes I was there too, so I understand, the things that they disciplined us with us and the things they wanted us to do, I just didn't see love in that. I thought they didn't love me because they wouldn't let me do what I wanted to do. When in essence, they were doing the things that were most beneficial for me in my life and my safety. Go back to an elder here. The safety of the congregation. That we've talked about, the teaching, the Bible, what it's about, and a lot of other things that we work on and pray for and help as we serve in the leadership. The verb that's used to describe those elders there in that verse is to direct the affairs, actually, is what it means, of the church well. And that's 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 17. Now, again, I want to emphasize, I've got this written down 3 times here, so I want to be sure to emphasize that it's not an authoritative type. It is a servant leadership. It's a servant leadership in the home. If we beat folks into subjection, they don't last long. And I'm not talking about physically, but spiritually, they tend to do what they got to do to get out from under that rule, and then they'll change. That's what we do not want. That's not the kind of management we need in the home. That is not the kind of management, and sometimes it does happen with elders that we see. I've never been associated with any, but I've been seen some that thought that that whatever they said went no matter what. And it's not about what an elder says or what an elder candidate says. It's back to this book again. Now, please remember, if you see something that I'm saying that's not according to this book, you need to let me know, because I don't intend for it to be that way. I want it to be what God says and what he is putting forth in his word to make us what we should be. Here's the other part of one of the words I said this morning, that his children should obey him with respect. When I think about that in the workplace, I think about that especially as serving as an elder. And then you think about it in a family. How is the best way that you gain respect? Or some of the best ways? Giving respect. Giving respect. Others. Y'all think about that. What does respect mean? I guess I'm talking too much and got you where you're not thinking now. Come on, y'all think. Y'all know more about it than I do. Yep. Right. You know, I heard this more than 15 times when I was a kid. Respect your elders, y'all. And I'm not talking about elders in the church. That wasn't what it was referenced. If you go back in the Bible, and you can find that from Genesis 1 all the way through about why do you respect an elder? When I say an elder, I'm talking about, some of us don't like to say that. It don't bother me a bit, but older people. When I was a kid in school and in church services, I never will forget. And this is just a simple matter, but it doesn't think about it all. But when I was 5 years old, I had a birthday party. I think that's about the only one I ever had. But anyway, I had it. I remember it. I got a picture somewhere of my dad and my mom both holding me up, and I got this nice little hat. I mean, I thought I was, boy, it was a fancy hat. Sort of like what Pete had on this morning, only it was kind of a straw hat like, but I thought it was beautiful. I never will forget that Sunday morning I wore that hat into the services. I walked right down, sat down right here at the front, and I thought I was something. My mother didn't take, she probably was 2 steps behind me, and she grabbed that hat off of my head and let me off. She said, "You're not showing proper respect to the Lord." Now, you know, I'm not saying all those things, but you see where I'm coming from, honoring respect and feeling where you are, being humble. And you know, we equate humility a lot of times with being low. And we equate being the other side of it, the opposite, being up here, when it's really not about height. Has nothing to do with height. It's about service and humility. It's about emulating the life of Christ. So when we see children obeying them with proper respect, they understand who they are because they have the ability, they've had experience, they've had so many things happen to them that they know what is best for that child. Maybe not know everything every time. They're not perfect. Same for the elders of the church. So you see that respect that we have, and I'm not talking about a hat necessarily, although it could be that. When I'm looking at this, we tend to let things, and I'll say this, sometimes I don't guess it's gripe, maybe it's fuss, I don't know, about my children, about things that they do sometimes, even at the stage that they're in life now. And I think about it, and I look back, and I said, but you reared them. Who can you say anything about? You're the one that did that. That's what you got because of what you did. Well, now that's what Jesus is trying to say as us. If we emulate the life of Christ, that's what we're going to look like. That's what we'll look like if we use that model in our families. And there are just tons and tons and tons. We could teach for years on that in the Bible. And yet we want to go to, and I'm not saying that we don't need those things, but so many times we want to go to psychologists and all this other stuff when we got it right here if we'll just use it and apply it and live by it. And that's what he's talking about here with those children, is he's talking about managing, that obey them properly with a proper respect. I read those verses earlier this morning that we looked at, because improper respect leads to rebellion. And a rebellious attitude left unattended will lead to death. Maybe 2 ways. One way for sure we know spiritually, if it just keeps on going, but it could lead to physical death. I'll tell you another thing along, and I'm giving you some of my illustrations. Y'all know more about me than after this class than you probably ever did, and I hope that's good. I pray that's good. I told y'all, some of you I did anyway, I had a little car one time that would run pretty fast, and so I did some bad things with that car. I drag raced quite a bit on the street, not at the drag strip. Did at the drag strip too, but anyway, and I never will forget what my dad said one time about that. He didn't know that at the time, but you know, I could have only seen what he would have done to me if he'd have caught me drag racing. And I'm not talking about, he wouldn't have hit me a bit. He wouldn't have whipped me. But I wouldn't have had a pretty little blue car anymore. it would have been gone. So he would remove that temptation I had. And that's kind of way that we think about it. Now, my dad was not a Christian, was not a member of the church. So, but you see and he led by, his family was taught, and he led by these principles. That's right. So when you look at those things, that's where I think about this managing the family, a man who is emotionally stable, spiritually, and I'm sort of reading off some of my notes here that I wrote, spiritually mature and wise enough that will provide adequate leadership in the home. He has demonstrated ability that he'll do that here as your elder. So does that again mean everything's perfect? No, we're not insinuating that. Think about that as you look for these candidates that will serve. You know, we always talk about the wisdom of Solomon. How wise was he? You remember what the Bible says about Solomon? He's a fairly wise guy, wasn't he? How about his family? Did it work out all right? Everything? Well, we need to think about, he didn't follow what God tried to get him to a lot of the times. If we follow what God does that mean everything's going to be perfect? No, because we're humans. We're going to make mistakes. But he gives us the way to make those changes, whether it's in our families or whether it's in our own lives, that we can be pleasing to him and we can be acceptable to his will, that we can live eternally with him in heaven. Some of you were at the funeral yesterday for Sandra and his mother, and I think about some of the things that were said there and Hal, and talk about the examples our parents have for us and what we see. I don't recall a whole lot of do this, don't do that when I grew up. But I recall a lot of seeing them do things that I knew were right. And I knew they expected me to follow that same rule. Well, again, when you come to here, how much can you find? Look what was right. Look at the history that we have of how things have gone when you don't follow what God's will is, but yet you do find those when they follow what God's will is. And we find the good shepherd, the great physician, his example that we're to emulate. You see how he cared for folks. He didn't do like we want to do, judge folks a lot of times. He came in, whether it was the woman at the well, whether it was someone that was ill, whether it was whatever in the case, he washed his disciples' feet. You see the humility. Now, that case, it was low physically, but you think about what he showed in his humility, how he cared about others. As I got older, and especially now as old as I am, that's some of the things that I think about, how much love our parents have for us. That's what's being shown here. You can see that in a candidate that wants to serve as an elder in their family. You can see that from the children back to the parents. It is obvious. I can see families right here in this congregation that the children, are they perfect? No. Some of them pretty close, look to me like, but we got some good youth in this congregation. We got some good parents that work hard at it. So, are they perfect? No. But they know what to do when they do make a mistake. And I'm just so glad that the Lord's allowed me to worship here and see what we have here, see what can be done if we'll follow this pattern. And that is on the family as we talk about it, the husband of one wife. We talked about that last week. Man whose children believe. I don't know how far we got into that, but that's important, because if you're going to teach your family how to do what God says, then you ought to see them doing that. That word believe is much used in the Bible, if you'll think about it. Believe, to be faithful, to be trustworthy. An elder must have believing or faithful children. And we mentioned that a little bit last week, but it's not about personalities. It's about this right here. You can see it in their lives. You can see the children are faithful and they're reliable, they're trustworthy, they're do what they are told to do, they'll do what they say they'll do, they believe in Jesus, and further than that, they've obeyed that gospel. They understand it. There are a lot of, and there's one guy, and I won't call his name, but I think like Michael was talking about in some of his sermons, he was one of the older men. He has a translation of the Bible or the New Testament, I know, and he is one of the strongest gospel preachers that I've ever known. I never actually heard him. I've seen him a lot on tape or heard him on tape and read a lot of his books. And for years and years, he would teach this was without a doubt they had to be Christians. In his later life, he changed that a little bit. Y'all remember, 100% sure. If they're Christians, you have no doubt. And that is the way that the elders in this congregation, way before I was ever here, have always tried to do. You know there's a way, it doesn't matter what it is, that you're 100% sure every single time. And so that's the method and that's the thought process that we try to use as elders before even I was here. Because if you're going to ask me a question, and I don't really see gray areas in the Bible. I see 100% sure. So if you're going to ask me a question about something, I'm going to look out for your soul, and I'm going to look out and tell you this is the way it needs to be. That's what it says here. If you got a doubt and you want to try to justify it through something else, I can assure you every time, 100 out of 100, I can tell you one way that it's going to be, and you'll be safe and you'll be saved. And that's the way as an elder I've got to do it. I don't have a choice, because I have to look out for your souls. That's the way we need to look out as we look for elder candidates too. Again, we're going to go into, ain't going to get too far into it, but we're going to talk about some other qualities that we want to look at here toward the end. The children not being wild, the managing his families, children obey him or with the proper respect that we just summed up. The next category that I have those qualifications sort of listed in is reputation. You say, well, reputation can be all over the place. Well, it can be. But an elder candidate's reputation needs to be true and tried. And we've talked about some of these before. I don't have long to talk about them today, so I'm not going to get into all of those. But I'm going to give you a little bit of stuff for you to look at next week. One is the blameless side. We've talked about that quite a bit. But you'll notice when the qualifications are listed in 1 Timothy and Titus, they start these off. Sometimes this word is used right before the family. Sometimes it's used right after the family. You think about that. It's tied together. As that all proceeds together. Blameless, not above reproach, respectable. And you'll say, well, you're not going to find those words exactly like that. We will find words as we look that mean that from the root word. If you look up the Greek language or some of the versions that you'll try to go back to it. I have I can't read Greek, y'all. I'm sorry, but if I've got a Bible, I've got a Strong's Concordance, and it can look up every single word in the Bible, and you can reference and run, and you can study. Now, it might take you a while, but you can find out what that word means. But you need to be sure you're looking at it in context with the words and the verses around it, and sometimes not just the chapter, but the chapters. You've got to put it all together. Don't pull a word out by itself and say, here's what it means. Because most of the time you find the words have sort of a multiple type meanings. And you'll have to look at what he's talking, what's the context of what's going on as you study that. So look at those words for next week. I think last lesson, the chance that I'll have in here, is the last quality that actually two qualities, and I'll have to hurry to get all of it in, but I've got to give Bubba his month to make sure he gets the deacons in. And that is service. The service of an elder candidate. What's he doing? Is he willing and eager to serve? Is he hospitable? Has he entrusted with God's work? And is he apt to teach? And that's a pretty good one when you think about apt. That's a little 3-letter word. What does it mean? You need to look that up and study that a little bit. We'll get into that next week. My time is actually out now, but I'm going to take a couple more minutes. We're going to sum up with the last characteristic of faith, when I just call it faith. Because an elder candidate, this is probably the first thing on the list that should be looked at. That's the reason I'm ending up with that, this faith. Family probably follows in there pretty close behind it. They're really all tied together when you look at it, just like the beauty of God and His Word, the way He puts it together. It's just amazing. You know, my little finite mind and yours, you know, so many times we think about it, and when I hear these people that say the computer and the technology, and look what man has done today, and I think about, that's nothing. That's a speck of sand compared to what God is in His mind. He created that mind that did all of that. He created more. And when I think about this, again, the power of God. Now look at this in the elder, and I'm going to take one more minute and I'm going to quit with this. When I was in high school, I did science projects. I'm sure most of you had a science project somewhere along the line. I never will forget one of the ones that I did. I made this model, and it was all about the heart. You guys know how much blood the heart pumps in a day? They're coming in early today. It was about the size of one of these tankers on a railroad car, if you've ever seen 80,000 gallons, whatever they are, big dudes. And the thing is, and I know it finally wears and it finally gives out, but you think about, we go to sleep at night, we don't think nothing about this steady pump. It don't quit. How many pumps, Casey, can you put out there pumping on a well that'll pump and not have to have the maintenance like the heart that we have does? They just don't last, do they? You think about this mind that we created a computer. We created all the things that we think are so wonderful, the technology, but God created this mind. That's who we serve, yet Jesus is in the Good Shepherd. Think about that for next week. Thank you for your time. God bless you.